Well, good Thursday afternoon to you. I am Dylan Ratigan, and we will have a complete mega panel look at the mano-a-mano casino war brewing between Shelley Adelson and Donald Trump and their individual support of two different presidential candidates, Donald Trump and Shelley Adelson, at each other's throats, and our presidential election the stage for their battle. But first, we're on day 2 of our 30 million jobs tour, because regardless who the president is, if we don't reform taxes, trade, and banking in the belly of the beast right here in Washington, D.C., in order to get those 30 million jobs, well, we need to have investment in this country, and we need the debate we deserve on those issues, taxes, trade, and banking, if you're going to have any kind of investment. It is the subtext of the 30 million jobs tour. It's the reason why we've chosen our nation's capital for the week 3 location of this ongoing effort throughout the year to get the conversation started among our elected leaders. Remember, the issue of creating investment and 30 million jobs in America is not a left-right issue. It is the ultimate American issue, and even the president acknowledges that the Washington culture has to change if we're going to have any chance of truly getting the debate America so desperately deserves.
No matter what party they belong to, I bet most Americans are thinking the same thing right about now. Nothing will get done in Washington this year, or next year, or maybe even the year after that, because Washington is broken.
Well, joining us now, two friends of this program, two men I admire and trust from very different sides of the aisle. But we do agree that we need to be working better with one another if we want to solve our country's problems. You can see Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Tom Coburn. I thank both of you for not only joining us, but agreeing to do so in this conversational fashion. It's easy to disagree. We could spend 3 hours fighting with each other about a million things. What would you say will be the thing that you think, Senator Sanders, that you're most likely to agree with Senator Coburn on when it comes to the issue of electoral dysfunction in America?
Well, I honestly don't know the senator's position, but I think it is very clear to most Americans that big money plays just an extraordinarily and very negative role in the political process in this country. On issue after issue, Dylan, bills that come to the floor, the American people want to move in one direction and Congress moves in another direction. For example, the American people are very, very strong about wanting to maintain Social Security, maintain Medicare, and you have big money interests that want to cut those programs, and a lot of folks in Congress are talking about that. So I would say, and I would hope that the senator would agree with me, that when you have now, as a result of Citizens United, these horrendous super PACs that are pouring in huge amounts of money from a handful of millionaires and billionaires, that they are making a very bad situation in terms of legislation even worse.
Your thoughts, Senator Coburn?
Well, I think Bernie and I could agree that we want to make sure Medicare's there in the future, that we want to make sure Social Security is there in the future. The problem is how do we save them, and how do we make the hard choices? I have a different view than Bernie does on money and politics. I look at the state of Virginia that has no limits on anything, and they have some of the most open, fair, and highest participation rates of any state in the country. I think what you don't see is people honestly putting out what they think are solutions to problems, because they're afraid they'll get criticized, because the number one goal for most people in Washington is to stay in Washington. And whether that's presidents or senators or members of the House. And I think the biggest mistake we have is we keep electing career politicians to represent us, not because they don't have pure motivations, but because oftentimes they lack real-world experience with which to make the hard choices and make priority choices for the country.
In the short term, the most obvious thing that sort of has been fascinating for me is watching the Republican Party for years advocate around transparency for money in politics, and watching the Democratic Party advocate around regulation of money in politics. As it stands right now, we have entirely unregulated, non-transparent money, which would seem to be bad for everybody. Whatever you feel about amending the Constitution and money in politics, whatever you feel about some of these broader issues, issues. Why are we not seeing the two of you and every of the other 543 people that are in our government seize immediately to the floor of our legislature to write a piece of super PAC transparency legislation, which we all know is the lowest hanging fruit, and then we can worry about arguing our way up the chain from there. Thoughts on the barrier from both of you to having the super PAC transparency legislation ASAP?
Let me say this, and again, I don't know what Senator Coburn's position is. We have offered a constitutional amendment to say what I think the vast majority of the American people agree with. That is, a corporation is not a person. What we have right now, you're seeing it, you saw it in Florida, you're going to continue to see it accelerate. People like Shelley Adelson and others, multi-billionaires, taking money out of their own pocket or out of their company's pocket, putting it into campaigns. We are moving in the direction where a small number of billionaires will directly control the political process in this country. I think the vast majority of the American people are opposed to that. Yeah. Short term, above and beyond the constitutional amendment, we should pass the Disclosure Act, which says that any super PAC ad will have the picture of the person who is paying for that saying, I approve that ad.
Senator Coburn?
Well, I think a couple of points need to be brought out. We're aware that Sheldon Adelson has given I think upwards of $10 million to Newt Gingrich. First of all, that's transparency, and that's the amount. So I would not disagree that there ought to be transparency in who contributes to the super PACs, and it ought to be public knowledge. But I don't think that necessarily means that you limit people's ability to participate in it. And I don't know the answer to the question that Bernie raises about whether or not corporations and entities other than individuals have First Amendment rights. We've already seen that tested in a number of ways in terms of advertising and advertising restrictions. So we have a whole body of law that would say corporations do have First Amendment rights, and we have a Supreme Court case narrowly decided that is our guide right now. And so I would agree that we ought to have transparency. I agree fully with that. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with matter of fact, I try to get transparency all the time around here and can't get it.
Dylan, I would just say, if I could, in response to Senator Coburn, we certainly agreed on transparency. The problem with the super PAC and the way the law is written right now, you get transparency after the election, not before. Well, I think transparency is putting when you do an ad or I do an ad, we've got to put our picture up on there and say, we approve this message. I think the corporation should have to do that as well.
Well, the wonderful thing is I'm not doing any more ads in the future because I've self-limited my terms, which I think is one of the best things we can do to restore confidence in Washington.
But in the broader sense, and sorry to interrupt you, but we're sitting in a situation right now where we had transparency from Shelley Adelson and Newt Gingrich because they volunteered it. We do not have transparency as to who's spending the money behind Mitt Romney, except for on a lagging basis. And right now there is no legislation that demands that we all get the benefit of what we got voluntarily from Newt and Shelley on transparency. And what's confusing, I think, for a lot of us in this country is while we have the broader debate about the electoral process, the incumbency bias, term limits, money in politics, gerrymandering, a lot to be discussed. It deserves a vigorous debate. It'll take some time. In the short term, why it is we're not seeing our government immediately right now, today, how are you doing? Get us super PAC transparency legislation immediately with 48-hour disclosure today as an indication of good faith from our Congress that we're going to address some of these broader issues. Is that unreasonable?
No, but I would tell you there isn't one Republican controls a committee in the Senate. We can't bring a bill to the floor. We don't have that capability. The second point I'd make is I would tell you that I think the fact that Mr. Adelson has given this much money to Newt Gingrich is hurting him. And that's borne out in the Virginia experience.
I agree.
It hurts because
I agree.
How much influence does Mr. Adelson going to have on Mr. Gingrich if, in fact, he wins?
And with that's just the case for passing transparency legislation immediately. You get the last word on the barrier to doing that, Senator Sanders.
Well, I would hope that Senator Coburn will join us in voting for the disclosure bill that I hope will reappear on the floor. I'm not sure that you voted for it last time, but at least it would force the CEOs of corporations to have their picture on the tube telling us they approve those terrible negative ads. I hope you would work with us on that.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think the American people, 311 million of us, would love if the 545 of you, and you two are two of the ones that I esteem more than many that are serving in this country, could help us to resolve the low-hanging fruit of secret, unregulated money. Let's go to transparent, unregulated money, and then we'll take it from there. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Tom Coburn and Bernie Sanders. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
See you, Dylan.
Thank you very much.